What screams this person peaked in high school to you? I honestly have heard the words boss babe so often that they've sort of lost all meaning to me. I just find the concept absurd now. You can be a woman who works making certain products for a living, but that's just that real work. Selling random crap you get from some overpriced distributor is just some blatant, incredibly obvious scam to me, on par with stuff like the lottery profiting off people's inability to comprehend probability, or the Nigerian prince email being self-selecting for people with no critical thinking ability. Your employer should not be making you pay and hire others unless you're a hiring manager, that is. I hate how easily exploited the merely ignorant are. Snake oil for burned out teen moms. Whenever we drink together he talking about like this. I ran into so and so the other day. Man, I wish I didn't mess that up when I had the chance. When was this, I ask? 10th grade. I had to tell him that was almost 20 years ago and to maybe move on. One that got me was he was at a bar and saw a group of people he knew but didn't really say anything to them. The next day he was saying how he was friends with them all but none of them would talk to him. I asked when the last time they hung out and he told me 4th grade. I had to leave and made an excuse to get out of there about 5 minutes later. I literally just got hit up on F by a guy that thought this about me. We seriously have hardly even spoken since 8th grade besides a handful of times on social media. We're in our 30s now. It's so weird to be a grown woman speaking to grown man. That is still having Yule fantasies about a 13-year-old girl, 13-year-old me. I get it. It's our history. I understand having the thought from time to time. The way this guy was talking, though, I could tell he thought about it a fair amount. This happens to me every couple years. Off the top of my head, it's happened with like 10 guys since graduating, and some of them have tried multiple times. Weird thing is it generally happens in clusters. I won't hear anything and then boom, 3 of them hit me up one after the other. It's very weird. Man, I feel real bad now because I myself haven't moved on from a girl from the 7th grade. I am 25 right now. It's a horrible infestation of the mind, basically. Not being able to move on and all that. I do understand though that it's not because of the girl but an underlying infestation of the mind that has gone way more deeper than I can reach right now. It's a byproduct of that infestation which I haven't been able to clear out. After reading this thread, I think it's gotta be nostalgia. I don't personally have a relationship that I feel this way about, but I've certainly had video games that I hadn't played in 10 years that I had an undying love for. Then one day, after thinking about it a whole lot, I decide it's going to be play that certain video game day, only to realize that I'm just not that into it anymore and I was viewing it through rose-tinted glasses. Probably associating a simpler, happier time with no responsibilities and the video game essentially being my everything at the time. The only difference is that I can play that video game again and see that, but they can't date that girl again. That's gotta be rough. I graduated in 05. I was sitting at a tire shop waiting for my truck to get done and an employee slightly older than me walks up to me and asks me, with no previous interaction, if I played football in high school. Wondering where this was going, I responded that I did, but I wasn't great at it. He asked what school I went to, and I told him. Then he starts talking about himself, how he was all conference and walking me through all of his high school accolades. I never asked for this conversation. I just sat there wondering why this nearly 40-year-old, wildly out of shape tire shop supervisor was telling me all of this. Then just as soon as it started he bid me good day and walked off. It was bizarre. The best comparison I could make was that he was like the manager Dan from the movie Waiting. That was his vibe. That's how I knew he peaked in high school. This is secondhand cringe, but your story reminded me of it. I'm from a small town in a somewhat rural area. We only have one newspaper to cover the county. I don't know if it was a slow news day thing or the paper had a hard-on for the guy, but it appeared that any time a local sports team was going to state, won a state championship, they would interview the same guy about the time he was on the local college basketball team that went undefeated all the way through the season, including winning the state title. Thing was, they won state in the mid to late 50s. The paper was talking about this on a somewhat regular basis into the 2010s. The guy had done well for himself professionally and was in a lot of the civic groups. Things like that, but it almost didn't matter what he did after college because he was on that winning team from 50 plus years ago. I had a similar experience at a Walmart tire center. A gentleman bearing a striking resemblance to CeeLo Green was helping me out. He was explaining the install procedure for my tire pressure monitor sensor, but went on a weird tangent the second a woman entered the shop. Out of the blue, he switched topics to how he was going to culinary school and is an accomplished chef. He also made a point to talk about how he had a full ride offer to Ohio State as a defensive end, even with CeeLo Green arms. He turned it down because he supposedly got a girl pregnant. The guy was wildly out of shape, and there was zero chance any of these stories were true. Obviously, he was coming up with random stuff to impress this girl, hoping she would overhear him. I just politely nodded and didn't say a word throughout the storytelling. The best part was when I witnessed the manager shooting him a look like, "This fool is out of his mind." A friend of mine is completely out of shape, with a very big gut, but always talks to me about how he did parkour, ballet, synchronized swimming, and several other things. Since he has an athletic background, I would offer to go lift with him, but alas, he tells me he can't do that, because lifting will make him slow and sluggish. He says he will bulk up too much. He says if he were to work out, he would be agile and quick. So anyways, he chooses to just be out of shape instead. He's 45, by the way. When I was active on Facebook years ago, someone started a sort of reunion group. I was the nerd in this scenario. One of the high school gals who was incredibly cruel found someone to marry her and ended up a stay-at-home mom who spent all day spouting bitter hate towards everyone while complaining about her own kids getting bullied at school. She had gained a lot of weight, and I'm fat myself, but she was even bigger than I. This gal would make the nastiest comments on my pictures to include my weight, which was hilarious considering her own size. Insult my job, my husband, and talk about how I was still the ugly nerd. The moderators refused to kick her off despite this. She posted similar vile on others' posts too, so I ended up reporting her to Facebook security for cyberbullying just cause, and left the group. Now that her kids are in school, she got a job in the public schools. She's probably bullying other parents now for all I know. I'm a CNA in a long-term care facility, and we have a group of mean girls in their 70s, 90s. I had a resident once ask me about one of them, and she said, "You know, the one in that group where you never see one without the rest, and the hierarchy is classic. There's a leader, she decides the activities and games they'll play. The second in command, she knows everything that happens in the place, and if the leader can't perform her duties, she is runner-up. The one who agrees with everything number one and to say, laughs at all their jokes and chases down staff if they need something, and the fringe dweller. Sometimes she's with them, other times she's off doing her own thing. I've also seen what happens to nice guys when they get old. They just get creepier and play the I'm old card." A story from my real life about an experience with a 30-something who definitely peaked in high school. About 15 years ago, I was working at a retail store. At the time, I was in my early 20s. I worked with a woman in her mid-30s. One day, pizza was ordered for what I assumed was for all employees. Also, I was told by the manager that there was pizza and to take a break and get some. I went up to the break room, and the co-worker was also in the break room. I grabbed a couple of slices of the pizza and began eating. She clearly was pissed that I did this. I assumed she was annoyed that I was eating the pizza, but being young and fearing conflict, I just let it go, figuring she would too. Besides, the manager told me to have some. On my next break, I go to the break room, and the pizza boxes are still on the table, except there is something written on the top, paraphrasing, "This is not for you. Don't take things that don't belong to you without asking." I was upset but knew the manager had told me I could have some and figured it would blow over. It did not blow over. From that day, anytime I was near her, she would talk about my looks or anything she thought might get a rise out of me to her friends. If it wasn't that, she was obviously annoyed by my presence and made it crystal clear in a passive-aggressive, petty way. Her behavior reminded me of a high school mean girl. Her immaturity because of some stupid misunderstanding could have been solved if she had just talked to me about it. Some people have asked for more details about the pizza situation. I never found out what the deal was. My assumption is that the girl and a few other employees, including the manager, went in on the pizza together. I am 99% sure she just never knew the manager offered me some pizza and thought I just helped myself. Like I said above, this was over 15 years ago. Some of the details have faded from my memory. What I remember has been described in this comment. I didn't work there long because of the girl's attitude towards me. She also caused a couple of coworkers who were previously nice to me to stop talking to me and ignore me when we were together, which aided in my departure. Pizzagate 2006 was never solved, and while I will always remember that a woman who was almost twice my age started talking about me and turning others against me because I had a couple slices of pizza and didn't seek her approval. I wasn't particularly popular in high school, but I was reasonably well known because of sports. I was back in town 11 years after graduation, and I ran into a girl who I was kind of friendly with, but who was it to anyone? She seemed not as cool as her, which for her meant most people because in her mind she was the coolest. I never bought into that nonsense in high school. I had my friends who I was close to and was friendly with people who were not my friends. I was out on New Year's Day with some of my friends from home at a bar who she did not particularly think were cool 11 years ago. She was tending bar and asked us why we weren't at the 10-year reunion in a super snide and dismissive way. My buddy, who is now professor at University of Utah's med school and was then a resident at MD Anderson, replied in the most cutting way possible, "We were busy," and left it at that. Maybe not a girl, but my best friend since we were 5 years old was always an hole. Ended up dating a girl and had 2 kids with her, and he would brag about him sleeping around on her. At first I was a bro and kept it a secret, but my only condition was that he stop telling me about it cause it bothered me. He never listened, so I spilled the beans to his girlfriend. I was naive and still wanted to be friends with him, kinda like a situation of we came this far, but he had access to his girlfriend's Facebook, where I told her of his doings. The first thing he said to me when he found out was, "You just broke this family apart, like off. I told you I'd do this if you either didn't stop or didn't tell me about it so I could stay ignorant." 2 years later, and my only regret was making efforts to keep his secret. I should have outed him immediately. When I met my sister-in-law, who was 30 at the time, she regaled me with stories of her life in high school, thinking being a mean girl was funny and actually used the term mean girl. Told me a story about actually telling a girl she couldn't sit at their table and pretending not to know who another girl was. She talked about it being a private, religious no less school, borrowing her daddy's Mercedes and driving kids around campus as if any of that was going to impress me. She said she wasn't going to change her last name when she got married, because her dad's name drew a lot of water in the city they live in. In reality, you can barely find her dad on Google, and he has since switched careers. Obviously, with that introduction, my husband and I are glad they live far, far away. My ex-boss was just like that. They had only hired me, despite not being the preferred candidate, because their number one ed up on some legal paperwork and didn't have the authority to do the job but could get it in 180 days. Why couldn't they have just said, "You're a fill-in for legal budget reasons until that person can work here"? Why did she have to make so much drama and false accusations? I got yelled at so many times for that wasn't my fault, like failing to respond to an email which wasn't actually sent to me because they spelled my name wrong. It is a common Anglo-Saxon name, or refusing to answer a supervisor when he was asking me questions about a project that I don't have access to and apologized for being unable to help them. Dumb like that. Naturally, all these accusations have an actual write-up date, regardless of date of the original complaint, on day 179, and I was fired at midnight that night. Usually I think that when I get fired it's my fault for being too stupid or too naive or something else about imposter syndrome, but that time, no. Literally all of her complaints were easily refuted by conversation logs, call logs, and the transcription logs of several meetings. The only thing I'm sorry for is the fact that she hired so many morons before she actually hired me. Like, why couldn't she have just said that she only needed me for 180 days? That's not an uncommon contract amount for my kind of position. I know a woman at work that gives me the mean girl vibe. To be fair, she's always been professional to me and she gets the job done, so I have no issue with her, but she has that look and general attitude, Roy friend. Plus you hear things around the office. And apparently she's got a reputation as sorta difficult to work with amongst the other women in the office, yet never heard any of the guys ever mention anything bad about her. I suspect that's by design, as she's objectively attractive and she knows how to use it to her advantage, as I've seen her interact with some of the managers and she definitely puts on the charm around them. The mean girl who bullied all the other girls in high school relentlessly. I telling the gym teacher your friend has too much cleavage in her regular t-shirt, so they're forced to wear a sweater on this now 85-degree day. But it's okay cause if you see them in public, they're now overweight with 3 little cum stain hell spawn running rampant through the store, but it's all okay cause they're now a better person who found Jesus. My ex-stepmother constantly bragged about being a chi. My best friend got divorced and married a woman like this. The fact that she was the head of the cheerleading squad, both homecoming queen and prom queen, is an actual frequent topic of conversation for her. For reference, we are nearing our 40s. She has a display case of tiaras she won, even has one she keeps in her car and wears while she's driving because she's queen of the road. Some of her personality can best be described as prom queen that had a short stint in modeling after high school, had a kid, and never got over it. I always tell my friend that, as long as you're happy. I have a friend who does this, but it was post-high school a few years. He had a job where he worked around celebrities for a couple years, but now lives back in our little hometown. Whenever one of those particular celebrities has a birthday or a new album or movie, etc., he will post a 15-year-old picture of himself with that celebrity and talk about their new project like they're good friends. One time, when he was still living in the city we lived in, one of the celebrities he always talked about and claimed they were buddies was spotted in a clothing shop in our neighborhood. I texted him and told him. He never brought up that celebrity again. Lamau. Then you have people like my mother. She hated having her picture taken. I don't know why. Anyway, I was in the Air Force in Alaska and won an award, and I had to go to the base AV and get my picture taken. I just asked the guy if I could buy a few, and he said, "Come back tomorrow and we will give you some." They gave me a couple of dozen. Nice picture too. I decided to send half of them to my folks. Years later, I retired from the Air Force and went to my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. My dad hired a photographer for the event, and I said something in regards that I would like a few copies. I mean, it has been 20 years. My mother says, I have those pictures you sent me from Alaska, 20 plus years later, and she felt they were fine. It's like celebrities who get their 15 minutes of fame and keep talking about it like everybody should be impressed or wowed even though it was X number of years ago. I knew someone like this, and she got to be a seat filler at a major awards show. She would keep talking about it again and again and again. It became so repetitive and obviously was the only thing that validated her very fragile ego. She ended up trying acting and wasn't very good at it. Essentially, she was one of those background extras who thought she had star quality but didn't possess the drive or ambition or work ethic to actually achieve the career she claimed she wanted. I've been the sole designer for a couple of startups, and the companies always want to put everyone's photos on the website. I'll come up with a simple format for everyone to copy with their phone, and always, there are a few people that send you a photo that is 10 plus years old. That's horrible quality that they refuse to move on from. I'm talking to the minimum wage employee, and I never win. There's always a few photos that stick out from the rest. Lots of bald dudes. Anyone who bullies other adults as if they were still in high school. There's this one guy who mercilessly harassed my husband when we were dating because he was super shy, and they weren't used to that because I was really outgoing. Flash forward 20 years and he comments on a picture that a mutual friend had posted that I happened to be in. He comments, that was when she was with the loser who cried at parties. Oh wait, she still is, with a bunch of laughing, crying faces. I just don't understand how people can just hang on to like that. A younger middle-aged guy whipped into my driveway on his cherry red Charger with all the aggressive body mods last week while my kids were close by and playing. I kept my eyes on him but wasn't giving threatening vibes. He pulls away, stops, leans his over-stylized head out his window and hollers out, "You like to stare?" I'm a big guy and can be intimidating if I need to. I took a few steps toward his car and he took his foot off of the brake. I told him that he looked lost, only house at the end of a cul-de-sac, and I was watching to see if he needed directions. After that he gave some obviously made-up story. I gave him directions, and as he pulled away he said, "Hey, you look good, man," and left. I do not look good. I look like someone that would get in a fight without thinking about whether or not I could win. Weirdest interaction I've had in a long time, and all I could think of was Biff Tannen saying, "What are you looking at, butthead?" That was a guy who peaked in high school. Almost 10 years after high school, a guy asked me if one of my friends was popular in high school. I once had some guy tell me he bet I was a loser in high school, probably about 10 years out from it as well. I was just like, is that supposed to be an insult? Who gives about who was popular in high school? Wearing 2 polos with both collars popped was popular when I was in high school, so I wasn't exactly surrounded by brilliance. I'd rather have been a loser in high school and someone in life than the opposite. The people that ask you to join those MLM schemes selling body wraps or the like. Anyone that has a Salt Life decal on their car when they live nowhere near the ocean or even a salt mine. I knew a girl who was 30-something never got her driver's license in a town where the closest store is a 15-minute drive from any location, whose only job ever was Wendy's for a couple months and then MLM scheme after MLM scheme. The last time I talked to her, she asked me for $40 and was talking about trying to sell candles online and complaining to me about her boyfriend waking her up at 4 in the morning on her birthday to make her give him a BJ, and then forgot to do anything for her birthday after the fact. The brief time my stepson played high school football was some of the worst times of my life. I already hate football and the general attitude of school spirit, but there was more than that. There was, no exaggeration, like 80 kids on the freshman football team at his school, so he only played about 20 seconds a game. I'm positive it was just a ploy to get money for the senior football team because each kid had to raise a certain amount of money to be on the team. Then they just let anyone who raised the money pass tryouts. On top of everything else, I had to be around those obnoxious sports parents who acted like every game was the championship. I was always caught between wanting to support him and hating absolutely everything else about it. Luckily, he was the kind of kid to always want to try something new and quit the team after a month. I played rugby in high school. My school wasn't typically good at anything besides rugby, so this was kinda a big deal for kids there if you made the team or not. Picture that stereotype of American kids playing GV football, but rugby. Anyways, when I was in grade 9, there was a guy in grade 13 who was a starter. I didn't really know him well, but his whole life revolved around him being on the team. This guy walking down the hallways at school was all the straight-up cookie-cutter cliches of the jock in a high school rom-com, wearing the Letterman jacket while high-fiving his buddies and pushing nerds into lockers. That was him every day. He graduated that year, and next year we had tryouts and they made the roster and we set schedules and blah blah blah. Come springtime we start practice outside. And all of a sudden one day this dude shows up to practice and tells the coaches he wants to help out. They let him, so he's running drills with us and telling people to tackle harder and going on 10-kilometer runs yelling at us to pick up the pace. It was so lame, but people just kinda put up with it, so he kept coming every day and being this like unofficial coach assistant. Anyways, that year we were really good, made it through the playoffs and got to the finals. Not on the day we were suiting up for the championship game, this guy walks into the locker room and suits up wearing his kit from the previous season. Everyone was looking around like, is this guy for real right now? It isn't like the coaches get dressed to play, they're just wearing coach stuff. So one dude half-joking asks him why he's putting on a jersey, and the dude turns around and tells us he's getting ready in case the head coach wants him to play. Dude came to the game with us and stood on the sidelines and kept yelling at us on the field the whole game, telling us to like up the other team. He was so into it, our coach told him to sit on the bus and wait for the end of the game at one point. Never in all my years have I ever had the urge to go back to high school to watch a rugby game. This guy wanted a victory lap to relive his glory moments.